4 minutes and 20 seconds. That's how long it took for Iran's newest hypersonic missile to travel from a launch site outside Tehran to a military target in central Israel. Not 10 minutes, not 15 minutes, 4 minutes and 20 seconds. From ignition to impact, launch detected to explosion, warning issued to destruction completed.
And here's the detail that makes every Israeli civil defense planner want to resign immediately. Israel's missile alert system requires 6 minutes to complete its full warning cycle. Detect the launch, calculate the trajectory, determine the impact zone, transmit alerts to the affected areas, sound the sirens, get the population into shelters, 6 minutes. The missile arrives in 4 minutes and 20 seconds. It hits 1 minute and 40 seconds before the warning system can finish telling people to take cover.
The Fattah-2, that's what Iran is calling it, a hypersonic glide vehicle with a range exceeding 1,400 kilometers and a speed that Israeli radar operators initially refused to believe when they saw it on their screens. Mach 15, 15 times the speed of sound. That's approximately 11,500 miles per hour. That's just over 3 miles per second. The distance from Tehran to Tel Aviv is 990 miles. Do the math. At 3.1 miles per second, 990 miles takes 4 minutes and 20 seconds.
And there is no defensive system currently deployed in Israel or anywhere else that can reliably intercept a target moving at Mach 15 while maneuvering during its terminal approach. The Fattah-2 is not Iran's first hypersonic missile. Iran unveiled the Fattah-1 last year with Mach 13 capability and a 1,400-kilometer range. The Fattah-2 is the upgraded variant. Same range, higher speed, better maneuverability, and most critically, a maneuverable re-entry vehicle that changes its flight path multiple times during descent. That last feature is what makes interception mathematically impossible with current technology. Not difficult, not unlikely, mathematically impossible. To understand why, you have to understand how missile defense actually works when it works. A radar detects an incoming missile. The system calculates where that missile will be in 30 seconds based on its current trajectory and speed. An interceptor launches toward the predicted intercept point. The interceptor arrives at that point at the exact moment the incoming missile is supposed to be there. They collide. The threat is neutralized. This works when the incoming missile follows a predictable ballistic arc. It does not work when the incoming missile changes direction mid-flight. The Fattah-2 doesn't fly a ballistic arc. It glides. After the initial boost phase, the missile separates from its rocket booster and enters a glide phase where small control surfaces adjust its trajectory continuously. Not huge course corrections, small adjustments. 5 degrees left, 3 degrees right, 2 degrees down. Each adjustment is tiny, but each adjustment means the missile is no longer where the defensive system predicted it would be. And when you're trying to hit a target moving at Mach 15, being wrong by 3 degrees means missing by miles. And what I observe when I look at Israel's layered defense architecture is that each system in that architecture was designed for a specific threat environment that no longer exists in the form planners anticipated. Israel's Arrow 3 interceptor system is designed to engage ballistic missiles at altitudes above 100 kilometers during the mid-course phase of flight. The Fattah-2 glides at altitudes below 50 kilometers during most of its flight. Arrow 3 cannot engage it effectively in that flight regime. David's sling is designed for medium-range threats at lower altitudes, but David's sling interceptors are optimized for targets moving between Mach 5 and Mach 8. The Fattah-2 is doing Mach 15. The closing speed is wrong. The intercept geometry doesn't work. Iron Dome is designed for short-range rockets and small drones. It's not even designed to attempt engagement against hypersonic missiles. The result is a missile that no deployed Israeli defensive system can reliably stop. Not because Israeli technology is bad, because the threat moves faster and maneuvers more aggressively than the systems were designed to defeat. And now consider what that means for the civilian warning architecture. Israel's Home Front Command operates one of the most sophisticated civilian alert systems in the world. The system is designed to detect incoming threats, calculate impact zones, and warn the affected population with enough time to reach shelter before impact. For rockets fired from Gaza, warning time is 15 to 90 seconds, depending on distance. For missiles fired from Lebanon, warning time is 1 to 5 minutes. For ballistic missiles fired from Iran using traditional trajectories, warning time was 10 to 15 minutes. The entire alert infrastructure was calibrated for those timeframes. Sirens are positioned based on how far people can move in the available warning time. Shelter locations are designated based on distance from residential areas that can be covered within the warning window. Public messaging tells people they have time to reach shelter if they move immediately when the alert sounds. All of that assumes the warning arrives before the missile. The Fattah-2 inverts that assumption entirely. The missile arrives before the warning completes. Not because detection is slow. Israel's radar network detects the launch within seconds. Not because calculation is slow. Computers calculate trajectories instantly. The delay is in the human systems that happen after detection. Alerts have to be transmitted to cellular networks. Sirens have to be activated. People have to hear the alert, process what it means, and start moving toward shelter. That process takes time, and the Fattah-2 doesn't give you that time. By the time the siren sounds, the missile has already hit. The alert becomes notification of an attack that already happened rather than warning of an attack that's coming. And notification after impact is useless. It doesn't save lives. It tells survivors what killed the people who didn't survive. Let me walk through what actually happens during a Fattah-2 launch from the moment Iran decides to fire to the moment the warhead detonates in Israel, because understanding the timeline makes clear why there is no defensive response that works. Minute 0. The missile launches from a mobile platform somewhere in central Iran. Iranian operators have programmed the target coordinates into the guidance system. The rocket motor ignites. The missile accelerates vertically. Israeli satellites detect the infrared signature of the rocket plume within 3 seconds. The detection data transmits to Israeli Air Defense Command. Radar systems in Israel and aboard U.S. Navy ships in the Mediterranean begin tracking the missile. All of this happens in the first 10 seconds. Minute 1. The missile is now at 40 kilometers altitude and still accelerating. Speed is approaching Mach 10. Israeli air defense computers are calculating the trajectory. The calculation shows the missile is headed toward Israeli airspace, not toward the Mediterranean, not toward Jordan, toward Israel. Decision protocols activate. Do we attempt intercept? Arrow 3 batteries go to ready status, but the missile is still accelerating, still climbing, and the optimal intercept window is already closing. Minute 2. The missile reaches peak altitude around 50 kilometers and separates from its booster. The hypersonic glide vehicle begins its descent phase. Speed is now Mach 15. Israeli air defense makes the decision. Launch Arrow 3 interceptors. 2 interceptors fire from separate batteries. Flight time to the intercept zone is 90 seconds. The Fattah-2 will be in Israeli airspace in 120 seconds. The math is tight, but theoretically possible. Minute 3. The Fattah-2 starts maneuvering, small course adjustments using its control surfaces. The glide path is no longer the predicted ballistic arc. The Arrow 3 interceptors are traveling toward an intercept point based on the pre-maneuver trajectory. The missile is no longer going to be at that point. Israeli radar tracks the maneuvers in real time, updates the intercept calculations, and realizes the interceptors are going to miss. There is no time to launch additional interceptors. The missile is 45 seconds from impact. Minute 4. Home Front Command activates sirens in the calculated impact zone. The Fattah-2 is now at 15 kilometers altitude, descending at Mach 15, maneuvering through its terminal approach. People in Tel Aviv hear the sirens and start moving toward shelters. The missile impacts a military command facility 20 seconds after the sirens sound. The people who were moving toward shelter when the explosion happened are still moving. They didn't make it. Warning time was 20 seconds. The time required to reach shelter from most locations in Tel Aviv is 90 seconds minimum. The attack is over in 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Detection happened, calculations happened, intercept attempts happened, warnings happened. None of it mattered because the missile moved too fast and maneuvered too well for any of the defensive responses to work. What I find analytically significant here is not only the physical outcome, but what it does to the psychological foundation of civil society in a conflict zone. For the last 15 years, Israelis have lived with the understanding that missile defense works. Not perfectly, not every time, but well enough that the threat from rockets and missiles was manageable. Iron Dome intercepts roughly 90% of rockets from Gaza. Arrow and David's Sling engage longer range threats with reasonable success rates. The civilian population trusts that when sirens sound, they have time to reach shelter, and the defensive systems have a good chance of intercepting the threat before it hits. The Fattah-2 destroys that trust, not gradually, instantly, because once the population understands that warning time no longer exists, the entire civil defense framework stops functioning. Shelters are useless if you cannot reach them before impact. Alert systems are useless if the alert arrives after the explosion. Defensive interceptors are useless if the threat moves too fast to hit. The psychological impact of this realization is more destabilizing than the physical damage from the missile strike itself. Israeli civilians have endured rocket attacks for decades by trusting that the systems and protocols would keep them safe most of the time. When that trust breaks, when people understand they could die before the warning even sounds, the calculus of living in Israel changes fundamentally. You cannot build a functioning society where millions of people go to work, send children to school, and maintain normal lives when death can arrive in 4 minutes with no effective warning and no defensive counter. What I also observe, and this is what the official statements carefully avoided acknowledging, is that the warning system failed, the Arrow 3 interceptors missed, and that if Iran had targeted a civilian population center instead of a military facility, hundreds would have died before anyone reached shelter. Those facts are too destabilizing to acknowledge publicly, but everyone in Israel's defense establishment knows them. And everyone is asking the same question. What do we do when the next Fattah-2 launches? The 4-minute flight time doesn't just break civilian defense, it breaks military response cycles. Israeli doctrine for responding to Iranian missile threats assumes that early warning provides time to launch retaliatory strikes before the Iranian missiles impact. The strategic logic is to punish Iran for attacking by ensuring that Israeli aircraft are already airborne and heading toward Iranian targets before the Iranian missiles even arrive. That creates deterrence. Iran knows that launching missiles means Israeli retaliation is already underway before the attack is complete. 4-minute flight time eliminates that response cycle entirely. By the time Israeli commanders receive confirmation of a launch, analyze the threat, authorize a retaliatory strike, and get aircraft airborne, the incoming missile has already impacted. The retaliation happens after the damage is done, not before. That changes the deterrence calculation in Iran's favor. Iran no longer has to worry that launching missiles triggers immediate retaliation that arrives before their attack is complete. They can launch, assess the damage, and then decide how to respond to Israeli retaliation. That is a fundamentally more favorable operational timeline than the one that existed when Israeli forces had 10 to 15 minutes of warning. The 4-minute window also compresses decision-making in ways that dramatically increase the risk of catastrophic miscalculation. When Israeli radar detects a Mach 15 object launched from Iran and headed toward Israeli airspace, commanders have 4 minutes to decide whether that object carries a conventional warhead or a nuclear warhead. 4 minutes to determine whether this is a limited strike or the opening wave of a total war scenario. 4 minutes to decide whether the appropriate response is proportional conventional retaliation or escalation to weapons of mass destruction. Those are decisions that should never be made under 4-minute time pressure. The Fattah-2 forces exactly that scenario. What I want to emphasize here is that Iran's demonstration is not a message for Israel alone. It is a message for every country that relies on missile defense systems and early warning networks. The United States operates similar systems, so does Taiwan. All of them are built on the same assumptions that just failed in Israel, that warning time exists, that intercept systems can engage hypersonic threats, that civilian populations can reach shelter before impact. China is developing hypersonic missiles with capabilities similar to or exceeding the Fattah-2. Russia already operates them. North Korea is working on them. The proliferation of hypersonic technology means that the 4-minute scenario Iran just demonstrated in the Middle East will be replicable in the Pacific, in Europe, and anywhere else that adversaries develop or acquire these weapons. What I see in these developments taken together is the accelerating obsolescence of an entire strategic framework that the Western defense establishment has spent decades and hundreds of billions of dollars constructing. The comfortable assumption that air defense and missile defense provide meaningful protection against modern threats is collapsing in real time. And no one has a replacement system that works against Mach 15 maneuvering targets. At 4 minutes and 20 seconds, faster than the alert system, faster than the intercept cycle, faster than the human decision loop, the Fattah-2 doesn't just hit its target, it hits the entire framework of assumptions that made living under missile threats survivable. And there is no defensive counter, no technological fix, no operational adjustment that restores the warning time that no longer exists. The missile is in the air, the impact is coming, and the alert sounds after the explosion.